This is Akashvani. We bring to you a literary talk on Amitav Ghosh's novel, The Calcutta Chromosome. The literary talk is presented to you by DR.Padma V.Mckertich, Associate Professor and Head of the Department of English, Stella Maris College, Chennai.
What if the most important scientific discovery of the 19th century was made not by the man who received the Nobel Prize for it, but by a group of illiterate Indian labourers, a railway clerk, and a woman who may or may not exist? This is the central idea in the Calcutta Chromosome, Amitav Ghosh's third work, published in 1995 by Picador in the United Kingdom and by Avon Books in the United States. Its full title is The Calcutta Chromosome, a novel of fevers, delirium, and discovery. The subtitle is itself a statement of intent, telling us right away that this will not be realism in any conventional sense. It is not. This is a novel about who gets to make knowledge, who gets to own it, and what happens to discoveries that powerful institutions cannot afford to acknowledge. It is at once a post-colonial novel, a science fiction novel, a ghost story, and a meditation on the history of medicine. The novel's greatest achievement is its bringing together of real, verifiable scientific history into its speculative framework. It is obvious that extensive research has been done, and the historical scaffolding of the novel is rock solid. This is exactly what makes the speculative architecture on top of it so very unsettling. One of the central figures in the novel is Sir Ronald Ross, the physician who won the Nobel Prize for Medicine in 1902 for discovering that malaria was spread by the female Anopheles mosquito. Obviously, he is a real figure. His experiments in Calcutta and Secunderabad in the 1890s are among the founding moments of tropical medicine, and his notebooks and correspondence are historical records. The novel uses all of these: the dates, the locations, the experimental methodology, the professional rivalries, with scrupulous accuracy. But what the novel then does is ask a question that official history cannot answer. Who were the Indian assistants who actually handled the mosquitoes? In Ross's own accounts, these are not individuated. They are unnamed and interchangeable characters. The novel gives them identities and voices. And then it goes further. It proposes that they were not merely labourers, but active agents of a counter-experiment. It claims that they steered Ross's research towards a discovery that they intended him to make, all the while concealing a deeper discovery of their own. Ghosh here is not simply fictionalizing history. He is interrogating the very structure of scientific history itself. Scientific discovery, as normally narrated, has a hero who is the scientist, it has a method, it has a eureka moment, and then there are a set of institutions that validate and record the finding. Ross fits this template perfectly. But a number of performers are left out here: the unnamed assistants, the local knowledge, and most importantly, the ways in which colonized people have navigated and subverted the systems that actually extracted their labor. The story of Sir Ronald Ross, however, is only one of the three strands of the novel. The strand that begins the novel is set in New York in the future, which is ironically our present today, with Antar tracing a man named Murugan, who had become obsessed with these gaps in the historical record of Sir Ronald Ross. Yet another strand of the novel follows Murugan as he follows clues leading to the reality of Sir Ronald Ross's discovery. In effect, then, we have Antar researching about Murugan, who is researching about Sir Ronald Ross, who is in turn researching about malaria. In each case, there are partial evidence and degraded records, with inference and speculation filling gaps where facts run out. The novel's most radical and philosophically rich contribution, however, is the idea of counter-science. The novel posits that a secret society organized around a figure known as Mangala and traceable through figures of the colonial underclass, has been conducting its own program of scientific research parallelly with Western science. This counter-science is also deliberately concealed from the colonizers. Steeped in ritual and ideas of transfer of the soul, it is tempting to read this counter-science as mysticism, superstition, or folk medicine. But all these terms today carry a patronizing sense. The counter-science in Ghosh's novel is systematic, it is experimental, and it is oriented towards a specific goal. And that goal is the deliberate manipulation of the human personality through the malaria parasite. Ultimately, this leads to the achievement of a kind of immortality through the transfer of consciousness between bodies. The novel very carefully makes this counter-science formally scientific in structure. It has hypotheses, it has experiments, and it has results. The difference is not that it is irrational, but the difference is that it operates according to a completely different set of beliefs. It is not oriented towards publication or institutionalization or the accumulation of academic credit. It is oriented towards a secret goal pursued by people who have every reason to distrust institutions because they would either appropriate or destroy their work. Secondly, the novel is making a pointed argument. Colonial science depended heavily on the labor, the bodies, and local knowledge of colonized populations. Tropical medicine in particular, the branch that includes Ross's malaria work, could not have been conducted without Indian assistants, Indian patients, and Indian informants. What the novel proposes is that this dependence was not passive. The colonized participants were not merely objects of study, but they had their own research agenda and they operated within the interstices of this colonial experiment. Thirdly, and most provocatively, the counter-science in the novel is presented as more successful than official science in its primary ambition. Ross does find the mosquito transmission mechanism, but Mangala's network has been working on something far more ambitious, and the novel strongly implies that they have achieved it. The Nobel laureate is, in this reading, an instrument who was used and then discarded. This is a deliberate inversion of the colonial narrative of scientific progress, of the idea that the colonies only had superstition and that Western science brought knowledge to it. However, Ghosh does not romanticize the counter-science or make it entirely benign. There are costs, and violence is present in its practice, but it is knowledge, and its concealment becomes necessary given the ways in which colonial power functioned. This is closely related to Gayatri Chakravarti Spivak's concept of the subaltern, whose speech cannot be heard within dominant institutional frameworks. Ghosh literalizes this. The subaltern scientists in his novels are not speechless, but they have deliberately made their speech unreadable to anyone looking with the assumptions of Western scientific historiography. The Calcutta Chromosome won the Arthur C. Clarke Award in 1997. This is an award for science fiction, and this invited critics to think seriously about the novel itself as science fiction. The novel fits neatly within the tradition of what has come to be called post-colonial speculative fiction. This was a trend that was emerging in the 1990s and used the speculative mode not as escapism but as a method for making visible what realism generally naturalizes and conceals. The novel's specific speculative premise that consciousness can be transferred between bodies through a chromosome-level mechanism is integrated into the historical records used in the novel. This is important. The novel does not frame its science-fictional elements as obviously and entirely fantastical. It treats them with the same seriousness as the verified history of Ross's experiments. The effect of this is deeply disorienting. The future frame of the novel, that is Anthar's New York of the 2020s, which is again ironically our present, with its ambient artificial intelligence systems and total information surveillance, is rendered with a flat, slightly exhausted texture of lived-in near-future fiction. The past and future frames mirror each other. Both are worlds in which people try to hide things from systems of total oversight, and both raise the question of what it means to possess knowledge that power would prefer that you did not have. The novel also engages seriously with science fiction's traditional concerns about the ethics of life extension and bodily transformation. The immortality being pursued by Mangala's network is not presented as straightforwardly utopian. It involves loss, substitution, and what amounts to a kind of colonization of other people's bodies. The novel is alert to the irony that the victims of colonial extraction might achieve liberation through a method that actually replicates the logic of colonial appropriation. As we said earlier, the novel operates across three temporal frames. The earliest is late 19th century Calcutta and Secunderabad, with Ross conducting his experiments. This is where Mangala's network is doing its work beneath and around colonial institutions. The middle frame is a recent past, the 1990s. This is where Murugan, an employee of a health research institution, becomes obsessed with the gaps in Ross's official biography and travels to Calcutta to investigate. There he vanishes. The outer frame is a near future. Antar sits at a workstation in New York, discovers a fragment of Murugan's identity card in a database, and begins reconstructing what happened to him. These frames do not resolve neatly into each other. Information moves between them in fragments. A face is recognized on a screen, a name recurs across centuries, or a document's provenance cannot be established. The structure mimics the experience of incomplete historical reconstruction, that we are never quite sure of what we know, how we know, or whether the pattern we are seeing is real or imposed. This structurally echoes the novel's thematic argument. Western science, as the novel depicts it, depends on a clean narrative, a discoverer, a method, a result, and a publication. Counter-science operates in noise, in the gaps between the official records, in the faces of unnamed assistants. The novel's refusal of a clean structure is its insistence that the counter-science's way of existing in the world, which is fragmented, partial, and unverifiable, is the appropriate form for this story. The novel also does not deliver any resolution in any conventional sense. Antar himself becomes part of the pattern. The novel's final gesture suggests that the network has been operating across countries and centuries, and that it is operating in Antar's time as well. The figure of Lakhan cuts across time and place. Sometimes he is Lakhan, sometimes Lakhan, sometimes Lakshman, sometimes Lachman, but he continues to operate, drawing in new participants. This is deeply unsettling, and depending on your reading, it can either be sinister or liberating. Ghosh leaves the ambiguity intact. The Calcutta chromosome then deals with what falls through the gaps of official knowledge, the unnamed, the unrecorded, the entropy that consumes the evidence before anyone thinks to preserve it. The novel forces us to consider whether some of what was lost was deliberately hidden, or whether it might still be somewhere alive.
You just heard to a literary talk on Amitav Ghosh's novel, The Calcutta Chromosome. The talk was delivered by Dr. Padma V.Mckertich, Associate Professor and Head of the Department of English, Stella Maris College, Chennai. This program came to you from the studios of Akashvani, Chennai.